Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. You're watching our cloud school. And today I'm very excited to talk about Terraform Test Framework, which is very recent and latest release from Terraform. And to be honest, that's most of waiting thing I'm waiting from Terraform since long time. Because as a developer, you write the test cases, you write your infrastructure as code, but it was very hard to test your infrastructure with the help of Golang or any other third-party framework. But that job is now made easy. Now we have a Terraform test framework and the built-in test command with Terraform, which we can use to perform the testing of your infrastructure as code, both integration and the unit test cases. Today I'm going to show you an example with the help of Azure Infrastructure as code, and that too we're going to take an example of Azure storage account. So let's begin our demonstration. For the demonstration, I'm going to use this Visual Studio instance, and that is where we are going to define our Terraform test configuration. Before we define the Terraform test configuration, first of all, I'm going to define the resource block on which we would like to run the Terraform test. So like I mentioned, I'm going to create the Azure storage account resource block so that we can perform or write our test cases on the storage account resource block. And for that, I'm going to copy the code which is available on the Terraform documentations. So you can simply search for Azure storage account Terraform, and that is what the block of code you will get from the Terraform code block. You can simply copy this code block. So that is what I have done it here. And if we go to the Visual Studio instance, here I'm going to define the module. I'm going to call it as a storage account module, and inside the module I'm going to create a Terraform file, terraform.tf file. I'm spending time on creating this module because if you are a beginner wants to learn the right from the beginning of creating the resources plus testing of it, then that might be helpful. You can skip to the next session if you would like to. If you are already aware about the process of creating the resources, here is my Terraform resource block for the storage account. Here I have defined certain number of variables. Now to define the variables, I'm going to create another variable file. So it's going to be Terraform variable.tf, and here I'm going to define all my variable files. So these are the variables which we will have. So the variable names are resource group name, resource name, location, account tier, and the replication type. If you look at here on the replication type and account tier, I'm having certain validations. So within the input variable, I'm having the validations, which is like I would like to allow the LRS and GRS type of replication type, plus the account tier should only be of type standard and premium. Now with that, my storage account module is successfully completed. If you would like, you can have the output block in the separate file. At the moment I do not have any output of this resource block, but if you have, there's no issue with that. So to define the test cases for any of your resource block or your Terraform directory, first thing you have to do is you have to create a directory within this particular root directory. So I'm going to define the directory, and your directory name should be test ending with s, which is a plural, which is going to be combined one or more test cases is going to be test, and that is what the directory name we have given. Now inside this directory we need to define a special file which is for the test cases, and the extension of the file should be tftest.htcl. so I'm going to give it the name to my file as in main. You can call anything, but the extension of the file should be tftest.htcl, which is HashiCorp language. You can see that I'm getting the icon for this particular file, which is the icon of your HashiCorp organization. If you're not getting this icon, which may be because you do not have the icon extension installed on your Visual Studio, you can install the icon extension and you would get this beautiful icons on your project. Now having this particular test file, so this is the file in which we are going to define all our test cases. Now the very first thing what you are going to do within your file is you are going to provide the values to your variable which are getting used inside your resource block. So let's say in my resource block, these all are the variables which I am using, my code is using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the variables values for those variables. So to define the values for the variables, you need to use the keyword variables, again ending with s, and here you have to define it like dynamic block. There is no equals to sign required, so just a dynamic block kind of thing. You opening curly braces, closing curly braces, and inside that you can define the value of all your variables. So these, whichever variables you have it for in your resource block, that is what I'm going to define it. Okay, so like resource group name, the resource name, location, account, tier type, and all. Next you have to define the providers block, otherwise you will get an error. So I'm going to define the providers block as well, because if you look at my resource block, which is a main module block, I do not have any providers defined here, which means that my test block needs to have provider, otherwise it will get an error. Now we come to the next stage, that is where we are going to define our test cases. We just increase the font to make it bigger. The keyword or the key here to define your test cases is you need to use the key run. Run is going to use for defining your test block, and with that run block you can define any number of test cases. So let's first of all define a test case which is going to validate the value of input variable. So for that I'm going to define the name of the test case. So I'm going to call it as in storage account variable validation. Okay, and that is what the name of this my test block is, opening bracket, closing bracket. Now there are certain attributes this run block requires. So the very first attribute which you pass is the command. At the moment I'm not getting an IntelliSense because there is no built-in extension available which can help you with the IntelliSense for this test, because this release is new, so it might take time to get those IntelliSense on those existing extension. So here the command name which you can provide, so the available commands which you can use is the Terraform plan and Terraform apply. So if you are willing to use the Terraform plan command, you have to use the plan keyword. So command name equals to plan. Make sure that you are not mentioning the name of command in the double quotes, otherwise you will get an error. Now next thing is, when this test case is going to run, what it will happen is it will try and deploy or create the, it will try and run the Terraform plan. So obviously the plan command will require certain number of variables, whichever variables required expected to be provided or expected by your Terraform resource block. So you have to define a variable block. Again, you define these blocks as in the dynamic block you define in any of your resource blocks. Here I have defined all my variable block. So if you look at here, I am defining the resource name as in any dummy name. You can provide anything, because the objective of right now the test is to make sure that we are having a validation error. The validation error is something which we are trying to test, right? The reason what we are, so which property we are going to test in this particular test case, the replication type, account replication type. Remember here in the replication type, the expected value was LRS and GRS, whereas the value which we are passing is OK here, which means that we are going to expect some error. If it is the case, then you need to use the expected failure, and that is what another attribute which you can use. So it's like a life cycle block when you define, and then after that you use the equal to sign, and then it's going to be array of the properties, whichever properties are going to expect to have the array, that is where you need to list down. For an example, I can have the value as an ABC, which is, I know for a account here is going to be invalid value. So what I can do is I can add another value like this. So what I'm saying here from this test case is, when this test case is going to run, these are two variables which is having incorrect values. So I'm expecting failure for these two variables which I have mentioned here in my test case. which means that now if I'm going to run my test case, I should get an error on these two, and if it is, then my test case is going to be succeeded. If it is not, then my test cases are going to be failed. Let's create another test case for the storage account, again using the run keyword, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a test case so that we are willing to validate the different actual versus expected. So after deploying the storage account, we would like to validate different attributes of the storage account which is deployed. So for example, what is the name of the storage account, what is the location of the storage account, and all those sort of things. So again, so I'm going to use the same set of variables again, but the difference here is that in this case I'm using a var keyword and I'm using the var.location, var.resource name, and so on. Whereas in the previous case, I've hard-coded the values. I have hard-coded the values because we wanted to test perform a negative test, and we wanted to validate perform a validation on our variable. So that was the objective of the test case. But here in this case, whichever values we have defined at the top, like this, these variable values we wanted to use in our test cases. So think this as a global variable, like a variable, and think this variable which you are assigning it as in the local variable. So here we have provided the value of our variable. Now I'm going to put the conditions. Here we are not expecting any assertion. Remember, here we are not expecting any failures like we were expecting in our previous case. Instead, we want to evaluate, or if you want to check the actual versus expected, and for that you can use a keyword assert. Again, it's like a dynamic block, and with the assert what you can do is you can put the value. So there are two values which you can put it here. First thing is, let's say you put the value of condition. So condition is going to be the storage account resource block, or the whichever resource you are performing the test on, that resource block, then the instance name, and then the attribute, and equals condition. I have used it here, right? In the equal condition, I have mentioned that if the storage account resource name is going to be equals to resource name, then the condition is going to be working successfully fine. If not, then this is what the error I should get. So I'm going to check these values. Similarly, I am going to check the rest of the other values for the other attributes. So I'm going to just copy and paste it. Here you can see that with the assert, I'm checking the location value, the account year, the access type. So whichever value we have passed as a variable, we are making sure that those values we are getting as an output. Remember, here in my resource block I have not added any output, right? But still I am able to use it without writing the output, whereas in the previous way of writing the test case you need to have the output block, then only you can use it, right? That is the difference. Now one thing I'm intentionally not specified here is the name of the resource group. The reason for that is, let's say that you have to create a storage account, and the storage account is expected to define or expected to be created on a resource group, and to create a resource group you do not have any code right now in your Terraform storage account module to define a resource group, but that is a prerequisite which is needed. So what you can do is you can define that those elements as in setup. And so what you can, to define the element as in setup, we are going to create a directory inside the test directory. I'm going to call that as in setup. You can call anything, doesn't matter. And inside this setup block I'm going to define another Terraform file, main.tf, and inside this main.tf we are going to add the code to create a resource group. Okay, so this is, let's say, the code to create a resource group where we have two variables, location and resource group name, and after that we are having the resource block which creates the resource group, and then once the resource group is created we are returning the name of the resource group and the ID of the resource group. So my setup is ready. Now what I can do is, as this is my prerequisite which is going to help me creating the resource group, so that using that resource group I can create my storage account in this resource group during my test phase. And for that I am going to create another run which is going to help me setting up or defining the resource block. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use again the name of the test case. In this case, the setup is the name of the test case. Then the command, here I'm using the apply command. The reason I'm using the apply command is because when this test case is going to run, this is going to run or actually provision the resource on the target Azure subscription with the help of these variables. Again, you have to give the variable, but how do we specify the location of the my setup or my resource group module? You can specify with the help of module keyword. Again, this is another keyword in case if you require to use, or in case if you require to call third-party modules. So here in this case we are going to use the module keyword, and module keyword requires the source block. And source block, I made a note here, which means that I made note here. So remember that when you specify the path of the source, it should start from the top, right? It should start from the storage account block or from the test block, test directory, and then setup directly like this. If you put a double dot and then directly setup, then it will not work. You will get an error, right? The initialization, Terraform initialization will not work. So once I have the test setup test case execution completed, so what I'm going to do is my setup test case execution will return the output, which is this output, and that is what I'm going to use in my test case. So I'm going to navigate to the location where the resource group name is expected. So let's put a variable name. So this is a variable name which we are looking for, or my Terraform code is looking for. Now I'm going to use run.setup. the name of the variable. So this is how within the test case we are setting up a dependency of a previous test execution, which means that first this test case will run, this will provision the resource group, and it will return the output. Then the output which we are receiving it, we are going to use that output in my next subsequent test case. So that's how the dependency has been set up. And now we should be able to provision the storage account, and after provisioning the storage account we should be able to validate it. Again, even for the validation, I'm not actually deploying the resource. You can see that I'm deploying the resource of this resource group, but here I'm still using the Terraform plan command, which means that it will only run the plan and it will validate from the plan, right? But it will not actually deploy the storage account. Whereas if I can simply copy another test case, let's say copy the test case and validate actual versus expected test, right? In this case, I'm going to use the Terraform apply command. So now I have variety of different test cases. The test case which just validates the variable values by or providing some incorrect values to the variable so that I get an error. And if I get an error which is expected behavior, so I'm going to pass my test case. Next, I'm going to have a dependency on the variable on some other module, in this case resource groups. I'm calling or test, I'm having a setup test case which is going to make a call to that module, return an output, and that output I'm using it just in the next test case, which is going to just run the plan and basically perform the assertion. In third case, again I'm using the command here as an apply, so it will actually destroy the actually provision the Terraform in the Azure subscription, and after provisioning that it will run the assertion. And once it is going to run the assertion, we can basically afterward it will destroy the resources. With that, our test case configuration is done, and this is, you can have any number of assertion within the single test case. You can have any number of test cases within this SCL block. Now it is the time to run your test cases. So I'll go to the root directory. To run the test case, you have to go to the resource block where you have your Terraform code. You can simply open the terminal by right clicking on that particular directory. So I'm not running the terminal on my test directory. I would like to run the terminal on the directory where we have our test case code, right? Where we have our Terraform code, not the test case code, right? Okay, terminal is there. I'm on to the storage account. What you need to do now is, first, obviously, if you're running the test, or if you're running the Terraform on local, you need to use the AZ login if you're using Azure to log into the Terraform, so that whenever we run the Terraform commands like initialization plan, it will run successfully. If you are using service principal, again make sure that, so the simplest thing is your Terraform initialization needs to be run, right? So whatever things you require to do to make the Terraform initialization running successfully, do that, like logging into Azure portal from the AZ CLI. So the very first command we are going to run is Terraform init command, right? At the moment I do not require to use any kind of a backend configuration or so let's use that. Focus here is, even though I've run the Terraform initialization command, my Terraform storage account or root directory location, but it was trying to detect my SCL file as well, right? How is it possible? The reason is, now your test commands or Terraform version 1.6 and onwards are intelligent enough to recognize the TF test SCL commands, SCL files, and it will try and evaluate the code inside that as well, right? So my initialization command is successfully completed. So the next command which we are going to run under the same directory in my Terraform storage account directory. So I'm going to run the Terraform test, right? And with that, what will happen is, it will automatically detect a directory which is a test ending with S, and in any file which is there inside the test, which is tftest.scl file, and it will try and execute the test case from that. So if you have more than one tftest.scl file, it will run the test case from each of these files. So as you can see here, it has detected a file which is main.tf_test.scl, and it's trying to run the test cases. It's in progress right now. One more thing here, right now when my test cases are running, it's not generating any kind of a state file or a local state file or remote state file. In my code I have not specified any remote state file location or anything like that, right? So magically your Terraform test command is not only running or provisioning the resources, but somehow it is managing the state somewhere at the remote location which is not visible here, right? And that is a beauty. So the reason for that is, in case if there are any failures in my test cases, Terraform test will make sure that it will tear down or decommission or destroy the resources which it has provisioned during the test run. So I'm going to pause the video while it is running the command, and then we will have a walkthrough of all the test cases which it has run with this command. So Terraform test command has successfully finished running all the 4 test cases, and all of them are actually passed. As you can see, the name of the test cases and the status here. Now finally it is trying to destroy the resources which are being provisioned from these test cases. So now if I go to the Azure resources, before it tears down, I'll show you. This is the storage account resource group which it has created, and inside the resource group we should have this resource which is a storage account which is just now created. Now with this tear down process, it should basically destroy the resources. Might take some time, so I'll pause the video again. So I got 4 test cases, 4 of them have passed, 0 of them are failed, and this is how you can use the Terraform test command to run your test cases. Just to revise that, to create a test block you have to have this test folder ending with S, and inside that you can define your tfstate.scl file. That is where you define all your test cases along with the assertions or the validations, whatever you would like to perform. I'm going to share this entire code into the blog as well as my GitHub repository. Feel free to refer to that, and if you have any questions, please do let me know. Till then, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Few more exciting content in future. Thanks for watching it. See you in the next video.